Hi, Mark. How are you?
I'm good, Martin. Thanks. How are you doing today?
Very well. Good to see you again. Well, before we start, I've been really looking forward to this based on our last conversation. But it would be great for the benefit of our audience if you give a little bit of background on you, your trajectory in the business value space, and anything else that you feel would be helpful for the audience.
Sure, I'd love to. I feel like I'm living the dream a little bit. I started really in the value space back in 2008 when I got my first value engineering job at SAP. And so I spent about 4 years there, and I really learned the craft of how to sell really, really big transformations for companies, connecting with different business stakeholders, different technology stakeholders. It was really like a master class on like how to do strategic, consultative, value-based selling. It was a lot of fun. It was a great company to be at the time, and I learned a lot around strategic selling, particularly for larger, big transformative kinds of deals. That's predominantly where I spent the time and fell in love with it, quite frankly. I think for a lot of folks in our practice, in our function, I think we love being in front of customers. We love helping customers solve business problems and helping educate them and hopefully guiding them in a way where maybe they weren't thinking of something in a holistic way, and we can help move the needle in their organization and help them drive some improvements without actually having to carry the quota.
Right.
So I think a lot of people like myself, I've played around with, should I just go into sales? I think it could be successful. I think it depends on your life stage and exactly what you want to do. But essentially, I love being a part of sales and engaging with customers. That is the fun part, is the intellectually challenging part of figuring out what's important to each individual customer and aligning to those things. So that's kind of where I started, and I built the love for it. And I've been in the pre-sales value function since 2008. From there, I went to VMware. I spent three years there when everybody was moving from on-prem to cloud and hybrid cloud. What does that mean? And so we were building out a practice on how to educate customers and move them in that path.
And VMware was a category creator in its own right, right? I mean, before VMware, you didn't have solutions or software that enabled you to have two different operating systems on the same machine, right?
Yeah. So it started out as server virtualization,
Yes.
and then expanded into this entire like hybrid cloud, on-prem, in the cloud. How do you manage workloads and different operating models? So yeah, it was a real interesting, and I had never been in infrastructure. Before SAP, I had never really been in software. So I've been working my way down the stack
Right.
to learn what is that value sale? How do you get around plumbing, right? It's just something we need to have to something that's delivering value. And so that's been part of the journey along the way as well, and really enjoyed both in particular. And then I made my way into ServiceNow. I spent 4 or 5 years at ServiceNow. Again, same concept, was an IT ticketing system back in like 2015, 2016. It was certainly more than that, but the way that the companies bought was really IT ticketing system. And then we were trying to move to this enterprise workflow platform. And how do you build more strategic sale from going into infrastructure, into the CIO, into the head of HR, to the CFO, all these back office functions, front office functions, customer success, customer support. And so how do you build that narrative with a customer on the value of doing that with ServiceNow? So that was a really fun transformation. I think watching the sales organization transform from product sellers into more consultative solution sellers. And then I took the opportunity to move over to Palo Alto Networks roughly about 4 years ago to do something very similar, right? A firewall company, legacy firewall company, shipping boxes into data centers and migrating to more network security, which actually expanded from individual data centers to things that are outside of the company's four walls, and into cloud and into security operations. The portfolio here is really large, but saw a very similar trajectory and a big market opportunity in that cybersecurity was really transforming from what it was in the 90s and the early 2000s into AI, machine learning, LLM. How is that going to drive cybersecurity and digitization in the future? So I thought it would be a really interesting place to be, to grow the career, but also that intellectual curiosity. I'd, again, never been in security before and wanted to learn, like, how do you tell that security story? It's more than just insurance. So how do you do that? How do you work with customers and educate them so that they can go tell their CEO, CFO, boards of directors, like the impact that they're having on the business, not just the security,
Sure.
the insurance aspect of security.
Amazing. There's so much to unpack across each one of those different companies that you worked at. I mean, look, from many of the different meetings that we've had with business value consultants, engineers, people within the pre-sale space, there's two companies that always come up. There's SAP and BMC, right? So both of them have had these, that are very well known for building these areas of excellence for value selling, value engineering. And many of those people then gone on to many other companies that have built considerable value across all those companies. Do you see there being a difference in terms of, because then you were at ServiceNow, right? You said a lot of the BMC people, I think, also went to ServiceNow. Do you see a lot of difference in terms of, depending on where you learned the craft, difference in methodology or approaches, or has there been kind of a homogenization in a good way of what is the best practice value selling, value practice?
Yeah, I definitely see some differences, and I always talk about value on a spectrum, right? And so there's more simplistic value of ROI, TCO. Our stuff is easier to use and it's cheaper. You should go with us, kind of thing. And then the more strategic consultative component, which is really where SAP was, which is we're transforming your business, right? Like a lot of times you find the more IT centric selling is a little bit more on the ROI TCO. That's where people's brains go for that.
Sure.
Whereas on the business software, the ERPs, the Workdays, eventually the ServiceNows was like, how do we build this more comprehensive understanding of the business value that's being generated? Because the end user in a lot of circumstances are not just IT, but the business. And IT has to enable that. And so how do we help bridge that communication and build a value narrative that can be tracked and measured across the business and help IT folks communicate what that value might be? So I've seen that, but there's also some homogenization that's going on as well. And it's, it's interesting when you talk about, BMC, I would say it's ServiceNow, just as a point of reference. I think a lot of sellers came over because ITSM was a natural play for that. But in the value practice, I think we only had one or two people from BMC that came over, because by the time I had gotten there, we were trying to grow from the IT business into HR and customer support and other back office kinds of functions. So we were expanding. I ended up hiring some folks from Workday and from SAP and Oracle and some other places. We had a mix of folks. Again, another side note, the individual that hired me at SAP, his name is Jeff Hess. He became the global value leader and solution engineering leader at BMC, and was driving their transformation there, as well as they were, I think, moving to a more strategic conversation into IT service management, which it's like ERP for IT. There's a lot of process changes that go away. It's not just a technology solution. So he was driving that. There was some similarities there, and I think that's where you see some of the blending as to how the value practice is evolving.
And with regard to VMware, so I'm only notionally familiar with the company, of course, as a user years ago, but also just from books and a bit of a case study behind it. And they were a category creator in their own right. I guess where I'm going with the question is, in a scenario where you're creating a category and you are doing very much an educational sell, crossing that chasm as fast as possible, getting everybody on board to whatever is the vision that you're trying to bring, which isn't just a company vision, but is a new way of doing something. How does your role adapt or need to adapt to that kind of a sale versus something like SAP, where people kind of, I would assume, know a bit better what they're buying. They just need to understand why SAP and why now.
Yeah, I'm going to answer two questions. I'm going to caveat, though. I think SAP has such a huge portfolio, and they're doing so many things. A lot of times you would introduce new technology to folks who maybe understood core ERP, but didn't really understand supply chain management or how human capital management was evolving to be a more integrated process. And how do you integrate human capital management into your ERP, et cetera, et cetera. So when I think of the more transformative sale or the educational sale, I think it is more consultative. I'm going to borrow from a saying that I'm going to give credit to Jade McPherson, who is actually still at ServiceNow. He used to always say the math is last, right? You got to get folks to understand what's happening, what changes need to happen in the business, what outcomes are we going, what business problems are we solving, and then you can get to the math. Like the data is always, do we have the right data? Do we have all the real data? Are we making some assumptions? Always, right? Doesn't matter if you're a 10-year-old company or you're General Electric and you're 100 years old. Your data is not perfect. And so there is some gut that goes with it. So if you, from an educational sale, or if you're transforming, you're a market leader, you're creating a new category, you got to take people from where they are. You got to give them a vision of where they can be and then show them how they can get there. And that becomes a collaboration because it's not just the value team that does that. It's usually the value practice in conjunction with maybe an architecture team, because there's today's architecture, there's tomorrow's architecture. How do we evolve from today to tomorrow in a safe and secure way? How do we get confidence that we can actually execute against that? Because there's a lot of risk in doing something that's a new category with a new vendor. So there's a lot of selling that needs to happen. And the value practitioner is absolutely a part of it and can really help the customer anchor on outcomes that are expected, the specific business problems, how they manifest in their organization, and then let your technology folks, your architects, your solution engineers, make those connections of here's how we solve those problems, here's how we help you deliver those outcomes. And then when the customer feels really comfortable with that, it's called supply chain of value understanding, then you can start putting the math to all those things. Like really understanding, how do we quantify those? Which ones don't we want to quantify but are strategic in nature? And then how do we tell that narrative in a nice package so that they can go get the prioritization to go get the money, or they can go internally and sell to the other stakeholders that they want. And the other part of that is when we're doing that selling, when we're uncovering business problems and outcomes, there's consensus building and alignment across the key stakeholders with your customer for all the different folks that need to say yes, because as we're all finding out, you can rely on that champion, but there may be 3 or 4 other people, maybe 10, that can actually say no and kill your deal. So you really have to do a really good job of making sure you understand the key stakeholders, and not just understanding who they are, but understanding how their problems are feeding into it so that they feel like they're part of the solution as well, and not something that's not being put upon them.
Yeah, 100%. There's such a it's so methodical how you need to address it if you want to have a successful, sales outcome, of course. One of the things that we're seeing is that a lot of the term that usually gets put out there is sales enablement. All the stuff that we're doing is sales enablement, either tooling or methodologies. But if you think about where the market has been going, which doesn't mean that this is anything new, it's just a different term on it. It's kind of more buyer enablement than sales enablement, because the role, I would assume, of a very good value engineer, value seller, is actually to help your prospect to buy better, right? That's why the 3 whys exist, right? Why this, why us, why now? And it feels like calling it value selling almost makes it one-sided, where I don't know what the term is, but the buyer enablement piece seems like such a critical aspect of it.
100%. And it's funny, I've over the last year or two, when I've built a slide deck and I'm going out and evangelizing in my own company around like what we're trying to do and how we do it, and I've thought about at one point in time moving away from the value selling terminology into value buying. But exactly. Again, I didn't want to start confusing internal salespeople and other leaders that it's, what is it? Is it something different? I don't understand. So I've actually stayed on the value selling, but you're 100% correct in that, like, again, nobody wants to be sold anything. And in complicated enterprise software, there are real risks associated with it. And you need to make sure that people's jobs are at risk. And,
for sure.
Some of these, people are spending millions of dollars, not just on the software, but maybe millions and tens of millions. And in the case of ERP, maybe $100 million on the implementation and the change management that goes along with that technology that they're buying. So it is really important that, the framing of this is, we are value selling is aligning to the customer's outcomes and problems so that you can help them and guide them understand how you can help them solve that problem with the technology that you're providing them and how you're going to be a partner in doing that.
And in your experience, how often have you come across a buyer who has never bought what you're selling before? That it's their first time, that champion is their first time with that initiative?
It's a lot more now. So I would say in my last 10 years, so when I was at ServiceNow, there's a lot of people that that didn't have never bought that kind of software, right? They had HR software, they had ERP software, they had IT technology. So how did this technology support all of that? How did it play nicely with it? How did it replace some of it? So there was a lot of newness in that. And the same thing here at Palo Alto, because cybersecurity is going through a renaissance. And quite frankly, the buying centers in companies for cybersecurity are disparate. Like there is not one buyer of all the cybersecurity technology that's out there today. There's dozens of buyers, people that have the budget for it, and some of the things that are being introduced
within the organization itself.
Yeah, within the organization itself, right? So the legacy firewall, you might be selling to the network team. Like there's a network security component to the network team, but when you're selling cloud security, the network team does not own cloud security, right? Or if you're selling security operations, like how are we managing incidents and events and risks as they come in? How do we mitigate against it? How do we solve for problems when they come in? Those are all different teams. They all have different wants and needs. They all have different budget authority, span of control. The CISO is got visibility into all that, but traditionally the CISO is not the same level, doesn't have the same board seat as a CFO or a CEO, yeah. or they have some span of control, but they don't have the authority to control everything that's going on there. It's an influence role. So a lot of things that we're doing today are influencing the CIO to think broadly, like how do all these things come together to create a more robust security for the next decade, 2 decades, right? So it's a transformation in the way that companies need to think about deploying cybersecurity as they're digitizing their business, as they're expanding how their customers and how their employees and how their partners are accessing all that great data that they have that they need to go run their businesses.
And how often then, if it is the first time that champion has bought what you're selling, I think it's pretty obvious, but how important is that relationship building, that trust? Because obviously they're your champion, they're about what you're trying to sell them or identify, help them understand the problems that they have, help them quantify the size of that problem or the economic cost of that problem. How much do they lean on you to really help them make the case internally?
I think it depends on the individual. I think there's good intentions with all the customers, right? They're all trying to do something that's good for their company. Sometimes it's good for their career as well.
Yeah.
But the reality is they haven't been there. And sometimes a lot like sellers. I've been successful selling the same way for the last 2 decades. Like, why would I do something different today? Even though the environment is different, the buyer is different. The buying community and customers is the same exact way. I spent the last 2 decades doing it this way. Like, why do I need to think about doing something different? Why do I need to go build a relationship or get buy-in from this other team over there when I never had to do that before, right? Or, they don't understand the change in the buying dynamics or understanding how these technologies are important. They have inputs and outputs that touch these other functions that are critical to them being successful as well. So there's definitely an openness to it for some customers. They innately know and they lean in and they ask questions and they want the help and understanding and building that knowledge so that they can go and help influence and tell the story internally as well. But there are other folks that just go back to what they know and they're like, I don't need a business case. That's not how we've done things in the past. And, I just need the POV and they're going to take my word on it, and so it's that seller champion relationship, that's existed. And sometimes you can rely on your champion and they can get the ball over the goal line. But in a lot of cases, particularly with today's technology and buying centers, it's more complex than that. And you need to be really adept at building a consensus within an organization when there are multiple stakeholders involved.
And when a champion tells you they don't need a business case, how often do they actually come back to you afterwards saying they need help to build one because their economic buyer said, show me a business case?
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, there are times when that is true, right? There's the relationship, the customer's already bought in that they need to make the change. The executives are on board. They own the budget. It's all right there. They just need, the I's dotted and the T's crossed. That's fine. So I don't know what a fair number would be, but maybe half. I think,
Yeah, yeah,
maybe half the time they come back and they're like, I really actually need a business case. And at that point, it's usually a little too late. Sometimes you can get the goal line, again, depending on if it's good enough value selling prior to that.
yeah.
Because sometimes you can do good value selling, but you haven't documented anything good with a business case, and they innately understand it, but they're not able to share that and tell that story internally to go get the
Yeah,
funding.
absolutely. And if they, like you said, if they've been asked for it, there must be some, not some lack of confidence, but some scrutiny that that champion has been put under, which makes
Right.
them come back react in a reactionary way, saying, I need the business case, which, like you said, is probably too late at that point.
When I'm thinking about the seller, right, just in terms of good seller hygiene, they need to understand the buying process of that customer. And sometimes our sellers are not used to selling something so big. And we have big dollar ticket items, depending on the size company, right? Certainly in the strategic and enterprise space, really, really big deals. And then in the commercial space, deals that are not quite as big. But understanding the buying authority, the budget authority, the span of control of your champion and your sponsor is critically important, right? And so when I hear a rep that comes back and they've got a $5 million deal on the table, and they're working with the VP of network security, or they're working with a VP, a CIO -1. I know they don't have $5 million sign-off authority. I automatically know there are very, very, very few companies, if any, where they have that kind of budget authority. When I was at ServiceNow, that line of demarcation, let's say to the CFO, was 5 million. 5 million automatically went to the CFO. So CIO is going to be a little bit lower, and VPs are going to be lower than that. So you have to understand who the ultimate sponsor is, like who owns the budget that's good, that can actually say yes. And I consider that part of value selling. It's like, but that's just general sales hygiene that all sellers should do, so that like what do you actually need to create to help that customer make that decision. And again, if there's the changing is hard, or thinking differently is hard. When you've been successful doing something a certain way over and over again, right? You build those habits.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, I love sales reps that have great customer relationships and protect them tooth and nail, right? Because those are the reps that know that, like, their bread and butter are these customer relationships. They can ask for favors. They can go to the next new company and sell the next greatest technology. They're very protective of these customer relations, particularly when they're higher up in the organization. Yeah. But you also need to be careful that sometimes you get in an organization, or you get to a particular piece of technology or solution set, that your particular champion may be an influencer, but is not really the owner of making the decision as to whether or not that's going to happen or not. And sometimes it's a little hard when you've had this trusting relationship and you've sold with this person, 3 different companies before. Now you got to do something different. That is a hard thing to do when you've built your career on these relationships.
Totally. So one of the things that we're finding a lot, and I'd love your thoughts on this, what we call the big hairy animal in the room is buyer indecision, right? It is our common enemy across every single company selling out there, but equally buyer indecision is also painful for the buy side, because it stalls progress, stalls indecision, it stalls innovation rather. And I would love to hear from your experience. What do you feel and there's a whole lot of research out there, something like 60% of deals now are lost due to indecision. Forrester just released their state of buying just last quarter, saying that 84% of deals stall. I'd love your thoughts on, from your experience, what are the main factors that drive indecision, and what are the best tools in your toolkit that can be applied to help unlock that indecision or prevent that even from happening?
Let me start by sharing a conversation I had with a CIO a while back. When we talk about budgets and does it have to be a budgeted item? And it doesn't, right? When you get to the right level within a company, if you have the ability to help them solve a particular business problem, they will find the budget for it.
I love it.
So when I think about this buyer indecision, more often than not is you haven't identified or there's not been an expressed pain point that needs to be solved urgently in order to help alleviate that pain, right? So you've just not done a good job of uncovering the customer pain and then making them feel comfortable that they can successfully resolve that pain with your technology and partnership, right? They've got to have confidence in you as a vendor, and then they've got to have confidence in their own organization to be able to execute against it. So my thought is that value selling should encompass all of that, right? Again, it's value selling is not just math. It's about identifying and connecting with a customer business problem. What are the outcomes that they need to get? And is the juice worth the squeeze, right? If we go after this, is there enough value in it? And then if it's something that's transformative or something that's very different from what they like, how do they get after it? Is it a phased process? Is it something where they need outside expertise? Is it things that they can do internally to go execute against it? And you've got to be able to resolve all of those. But a lot of it starts with just getting to like, is the problem big enough and hairy enough, to use your terminology, that it's solvable, right? That they actually want to go after it because it's important to their business. And so there's two components when I think about delivering that value to the customer. One is the ROI, is the value worth it enough? And ROI is not just, again, the math equation. It's strategically, is this important? And is this financially a beneficial thing for us to do? And then on the strategic side, is it important enough so that it gets prioritized over other projects that we have in our portfolio? And you need to be able to do both in the process. So when you're uncovering the pain, you're actually identifying something that's strategically important to the customer. And then through value selling, you're also identifying what is the return that they're going to get. Like, what are the outcomes they're going to get as a result of doing this with you? You need to be able to do all of that to really get past buyer decision.
Yeah, for sure. Well, look, Marc, this was a fantastic conversation. I'm mindful of your time, but we always have two final questions we like to ask everybody. They're two very similar questions. The first one is, who's the best value engineer you've worked with? Could be a mentor, a colleague, but somebody that you felt for whatever reason, whatever factors has been the best in your experience.
So many to think about. There were good ones all along the way, for sure. I'm going to pick somebody who actually recently retired. So there was a woman by the name of Susan Story who I hired when I was at ServiceNow. And it was at the beginning of when we were transforming from this IT ticketing system to this enterprise service management, enterprise workflow platform, where we needed to elevate who we were selling to. Deal sizes were getting bigger. Methodology was changing, et cetera, et cetera. And Susan was exceptional at the hard math, science, process driven, whatever. But where her strength was probably better than most everybody else was on the change management side, on the relationship building side. I always talk to folks when I'm hiring and people internally on my own teams, and whenever I'm talking, like, this job is hard, right? You're asked to do a lot, right? Yeah. There's a lot of skill sets and competencies that you're asked to come to the table with. You have to understand the process. You have to understand the value selling. You have to be able to go toe to toe with the CFO because nobody else can do it. You have to know enough of the technology to be able to help create the narrative, to guide the technology people when they need to be guided in a particular direction. But most importantly, the hardest part is you're working with salespeople who have maybe never met you before, never done value selling before. And she was exceptional. Susan was exceptional at going in and building these relationships, getting the sellers to trust her. And I always call it, you meet customers where they are, you meet sellers where they are as well. You don't force them into a process that's totally uncomfortable for them either. I'll meet you where you are. I'm going to invest in you, and then you invest back in me. And she just had this relationship ability that was superior to almost everybody that I've ever met. Because again, I believe it's the hardest part of the job, aligning with the salespeople, building a pipeline of deals that you can work on so that you can, it's an influence job. They're not, in any company I've worked at, including SAP, their salespeople are not required to work with you. Wow. So you've got to continually earn the right and demonstrate that you're going to add value to their sales process. And Susan was exceptional at that.
Amazing. First time I've heard that as a key characteristic, which makes all the sense, right? Because Matthew Welsh, who's we've had on this fireside chat previously. He heads up value at SalesLoft, and he says, value is a team sport. Everybody's involved, right? And the closer that team, of course, and the better intertwined they are, the stronger the result. Okay, we've talked about value engineering, value consulting. Who are some of the best or the best value seller that you've ever worked with?
That's going to be a little bit more challenging. I've been in a leadership role for about 10 years now. So I haven't had a lot of direct seller interaction. I'm going to go back to SAP. There are people here at Palo that are exceptional. I don't work with a lot of them on a day-to-day basis. There are people at ServiceNow that were exceptional. When I started there, I was an individual contributor role for a short period of time, and I got to work with some strong people over there. But I'm going to say that there's a gentleman by the name of Jamie at SAP. I think his last name was Soroy, and he just sold that way. Right? It was like as I was learning the job, like he sold that way, and I didn't need to convince him of anything.
Yeah.
Like he leveraged me, like he orchestrated the team sport concept, right? He orchestrated everybody to help him in the way that he felt he needed to be helped to drive the sale, right? So rather than me having to convince somebody, here's how you should be selling, here's how we would engage, here's a process and a methodology, here's a deck we can go talk to the customer with to get them on board to engage in the process. He just naturally sold that way. And there have been some other people along the way as well that have done that. But he's one that I think because it was early in my career and as I was learning, I was like, hey, this guy gets it. I don't really even have to sell to him. But he's also doing some of my job as well. Is that good? I don't know. but definitely, I appreciated the way that he approached engaging customers.
It's amazing because the two characteristics across both value engineering and value selling that you pointed out were very human, empathy, human-based characteristics, right? Being able to work with salespeople and be able to orchestrate a team around you, which makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So let me just real quick on that point, because there's a lot of conversation around AI and LLM.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be great. I think there's going to be lots of innovation, and buying and selling are going to go through more iterations over the next decade because of it. But there's still this component. Like people talk about, do you need the salesperson? Do you not need the salesperson? Can customers totally self-serve? And I think, the pendulum is going to swing, a little bit more, there's going to be a little bit more self-service capability, more information available to customers, but that information overload still exists. Sure. And having a trusted person that really understands that space, because customers are not only focused in that space, and AI and LLM are going to need some human intervention and some TLC to create that. Again, we go to that indecision. The people trust and believe they understand the business problem. Do they understand, like they can solve the problem? Are you going to just get that from getting some data and content regurgitated back from an LLM or AI? And so I think there's going to be that human part that is still going to be needed. That empathy between human to human is still going to be an integral part of the buying selling process for a long time. Not the same way it is today, maybe, but it certainly will still be there.
Totally agree. And AI shouldn't be replacing, it should enable. It should be helping everybody do their job better by enabling them to be much more productive, right? Doing the things that automating what can be automating, but the human touch, the confidence building, the trust building, the buyer enablement or education, there still needs to be that human in the loop.
Yep.
Marc, thank you very much. It's been great.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.